Hello, Prof. Greetings. Can you hear me?
Yes, hello. I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm having load shedding here. So, um, yeah, but it's a great privilege to have you today amidst all the complexities on the communication problems. Thank you
No,
so much.
thank you for having me, and I'm glad we sorted it out. And I'm looking forward to having 1 hour talking about some of the interesting topics that I think are relevant to all of us.
Thank you so much, Prof. Let's just in the next 5 minutes we'll start.
Of course.
Mm. Okay, so we got to start. Hello and greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for making it possible for today. For today's conversation, we started in good faith, and within the past 3 days, we've been having like interesting conversation, and we've listened to briefly Professor Natasha Vita Moore. We listened to Brenda, and we've listened to people from different institutions. And yesterday we had the very big one with Aubrey de Grey. And today we with us is also a very great masquerade in the longevity community. So a very interesting fellow. Um, Professor Dominic Tor is someone that is very passionate about longevity education. And he's interested in Africa, and he wants Africa to participate in the longevity revolution. He is very open-minded. He is a firm believer in Africa, and he is very supportive of anything that comes from Africa. You can look him up, but let me give you a little bit background of Professor Dominic Tor. Okay, he is the president of Geneva College of Longevity Science, and we are also partner. And if he's even interested, he wants us to spread the longevity message um, across Africa by expanding the footprint of what we do and how we do them. And of course, we know he has a very strong background, and he's a professor of pharmacy and also a visiting professor to Carol De Villa University of Medicine and Pharmacy. So any other thing that you want to know about our great professor and friend, please feel free. Also follow him on LinkedIn. Thank you so much, Professor Tor. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction and the very friendly words. I appreciate the opportunity to being with all of you who are taking the time tonight to discuss a little bit more about frameworks in the space of longevity, science, and medicine. So, as you just heard, my background is academic. I'm the president of the Geneva College of Longevity Science, which is actually the first and only institution, academic institution in the world right now that is focusing entirely on longevity science. We are training doctors, we are training healthcare professionals from different backgrounds, so physiotherapists, nutritionists, fitness trainers. We, of course, also have students with a legal background or a regulatory background. So I think it touches upon many of the things that I will be talking about today. And let me share my screen now. Let's see if that works. I hope you can see. Then I will switch into full screen mode. So that hopefully means you only see the presentation and nothing else. So the title of my talk is Frameworks Shaping the Future of Regenerative Medicine, Clinical Trials, and Ethical Medical Innovation in Africa, because obviously Africa is a hugely important market when we talk about longevity. There are others maybe that are very often talked about, what we would call hubs, as in Dubai or the UAE or GCC in general, or Switzerland, of course, which we're very proud of, and then other places like Singapore or the United States. And there can be said a lot of things about that, and maybe it is due to the financial possibilities there. But of course, looking forward with the growth of the population in Africa, it's extremely important to think about the demographic change that you will see at some point, as these societies mature, there will be more people that are maybe older, and we have to think about how we can deal with this situation. And of course, some of the things that you will see now are maybe more relating to the society that I live in, Switzerland, but they definitely hold universal truth, and they will become applicable to Africa in the future. So the problem that we know, and I will go over that very quickly, is the dramatic difference between lifespan and health span, and I'm sure this has been covered extensively by Aubrey de Grey yesterday and some of the other speakers. Problem is that people tend to grow older but they don't necessarily tend to live healthy for all that time. So health span means the years that you spend in good health, being able to do the things that you love or have to do, and not spending your last years in sickness. And this is what we want to promote. And I think there is something that can be done for that. And we see that especially in Western countries like the United States, this gap is increasing. So people live longer, but they don't also stay healthy for longer. And in the end, you see it here. This is not absolutely current. It's of 2019 in the United States, almost 12 and a half years that they live in bed. So this is the problem that we want to solve. And of course, again, this is data from an international overview, so World Health Organization, that there are tons of healthcare problems that people have rated, access to treatment, which become difficult, not enough staff in the hospitals, the cost of treatment, bureaucracy, lack of investment. So these are all problems you're very much familiar with in Africa. And then there is aging population, which is also a problem, and maybe more so now in Western industrialized countries, but it's going to be something that you will have to be dealing with in the future. So obviously, there is a lot of reasons why our healthcare systems, plural, are at a limit right now, and we have to think about what we can do about that. And aging societies, of course, need healthy longevity because if everybody gets older, who's there to look after these people? So what you see here, some of the countries that are maybe famous for having a lot of old people, like Japan, but again, in Asian countries in general, and then many of the European ones, you see that the estimated share of people that are age 65 and older is increasing dramatically. And this has a big impact on many things. And looking at Europe specifically, you see that, and this is a graphic that is worth taking a minute to sort of discover. This really pits those people that are aged 65 plus per 100 people of working age. So, meaning if you look at 2015 at Spain, for instance, at the very bottom, you will see that for 100 people that are working, there are about 30% of them are 65 plus. So 100 people that are working are basically earning the money so that the healthcare system, the pensions, whatever, can be paid for 35. I would say this is something that seems to be doable. Now, if we go to the future, suddenly that number is closer to 80 people. So suddenly 100 people work, so 80 people can live from that. I know this is simplified, but still, it's a bit harder because that would mean that you have to give like 50% of your income to these people. And at some point, if that shift is dramatic, it won't hold up. So our systems that are basically very good in many of these European countries, they will get to a point where they are breaking because it's not enough people paying in, and it's probably a lot of people getting something out of that. And when we talk about healthcare, of course, if we achieve this possibility of extending health span, ensuring that people, well, obviously they get older, which is something that we all want to to see. But if they do so in a healthy fashion, then costs will be lower. And it makes sense to talk about cost and financials, which is not the nicest thing because on an individual level, we care about other things like experiences, being with our family, being cared for, caring for others. But I think if you want to have politicians and regulators listen, then you have to talk about money. So let's make it about money in this case. Now, what can medicine do? So medicine has been reactive for a long time, maybe since its inception. So treating disease as soon as it appears, and historically, there is a very good reason for that. The only way to understand that someone was at risk of becoming unhealthy in a disease state was simply by waiting for symptoms to show. There was no advanced technology, no diagnostics, nothing that could tell people, oh, this is a person at risk. You started treating once the problem has become visible. And of course, clinical success is now essentially the question of crisis management. So nobody's really looking into prolonging health. It's about prolonging life. So things are being done in order to prevent patients from dying. And we are reaching now a point, maybe similar to 120, 100 years ago in public health, where we finally understand what are the drivers of aging, what are the mechanisms behind it. I mean, there's a long way to go, but we have these um, hallmarks of aging, as you probably have heard before, and we have the ways to manipulate them. So it's very similar to the situation of public health when it split itself from medicine, when they understood what makes you ill. So it's not immigrants, it's not, I don't know, specific parts of the population, maybe magicians or whatever. What makes you sick are little, to your naked eye, invisible germs or other things. And suddenly people understood we have to keep our water clean, we have to remove our waste in a way so people don't get sick from it, etc. So I think we are now arriving at a point in time where we can also shift our focus from disease treatment to disease prevention and rejuvenation, health span. And this is something that's extremely important when we talk about longevity. And I always like to make people remember them. It's not longevity is not just maximum life expectancy that we want to push. Of course, obviously, in the end, ultimately, it would be nice if everybody was living to a very, very old age. So maybe things that we now consider biblical, 100 years, 120 years, now, but the true meaning is increasing health span and increasing quality of life. This is what we want to achieve when we talk about longevity today, because this is really within reach. And the more futuristic things are wonderful to discuss, but I think are not very near and especially not available to just everyone. So again, there is a question of how we can make all of this accessible to all people and not just maybe rich ones or lucky ones. Now, when we try to define longevity medicine, because we were talking about science and science extends to many disciplines, and longevity really affects many different industries and scientific specialties. It's all coming together, right? So when we talk about a healthcare system, then we are talking about business. When we talk about biology, it's not necessarily things that are being used in medicine because it might be still too advanced, too experimental, etc. So longevity medicine is specifically being dedicated to extending healthy lifespan. This is what we just established, and enhancing quality of life. And it's a data-driven, ultra-personalized approach, and it aims to slow aging or maybe even reverse it and definitely delay the onset of age-related disease, typically the kind of disease that statistically kills us in the end. And it leverages many things. And this is why suddenly we talked about the many disciplines it integrates. There is AI that plays a big part, and we will talk about that in a minute. Now, let's talk about the role of a longevity physician, because that role is universal, whether in Europe, in Asia, in the States, or in Africa. So we're talking about someone who's not just a rebranded general practitioner. It's really a new medical entity dedicated to this goal of extending healthy lifespan. And I think one of the challenges here is that these doctors have to work in a very fast evolving landscape of new treatments becoming available, of new regulatory oversight being created. And you have to combine many different things because you look at hormones, you look at internal medicine, molecular biology, digital health, psychology, nutrition, tons of things. And we try to show this with this chart here. Very often you see longevity medicine being depicted as a sort of a pyramid, which makes sense. The pyramid usually shows, well, at the bottom is the things everybody can do easily, nutrition and exercise. And then the next step is maybe a little bit more advanced. And off top of that, and top of that, and the top of the pyramid is the things that are rarely being done, the expensive one, the medical longevity intervention. We put it into an hourglass model or two pyramids, if you will, because we wanted to show that the doctor is super central to everything that happens. And surrounding that is diagnostics, because they are really guiding the doctor. They have to be, because they can simply make an assumption or a lucky guess. They need to be following protocols, and they have to be diagnostic protocols in order to establish an understanding of the patient. And this is the typical medical patient journey. Now, longevity medicine, you will hear about this often, is ultra personalized. So it's different for me, it's different for you, it's different for your neighbor, because we're all different when we look at our epigenetics, genetics, microbiome, whatever. But what remains similar is the patient
This is
journey,
my class. I started.
which
Anyway,
means
I'll just
an
move to.
onboarding process where
You
you
see
need
how
to
white
make
now?
an
Other
assessment
students are there, but they don't
of,
care. Even you are.
the patient. And once you have that assessment and have the understanding of the patient, the doctor will choose a personalized treatment plan, which will be implemented and monitored. And then it will be reassessed and optimized because essentially this is following your life course. So there will be changes. There have to be changes as you grow older. It's not just a question of ticking the right boxes as a doctor. The patient starts changing over the years and decades. So even if the doctor chose the right things to do in the beginning, then he has to adapt over time. Now, it's becoming a bit more difficult to talk about what are longevity clinics because there are so many different types of them around, and we try to sort of categorize them. There are virtual clinics, clinics where basically you order things online, tests, and maybe wearables, and they combine that data and then they send you recommendations, and maybe they even send you product supplements or whatever. Then on the other end of the spectrum, there is the elite concierge physician. So these are the famous doctors that you might read about that only have a couple of patients that they can dedicate it a lot of time to. And it's really personalized direct medical care. Then there are prestige clinics, very fancy. I know a lot of them. I'm always impressed about, the level of detail, not just from a medical side, but because people are expecting a lot from these places. They invest into the aesthetics of the place, of the architecture. It looks like a fancy five-star hotel, and very often they are situated in such an environment. And then there are hospital clinics, longevity clinics that are part of a hospital infrastructure, and that is also very interesting. It doesn't necessarily mean they're cheaper as others, but they have access to the diagnostic environment, the laboratories, the imaging hardware, etc., from a hospital setting. And then you have other things that are also could be called longevity clinics, and they are maybe more coming from the wellness side of things. So this is really a place where you see every kind of clinic, and there is no set definition of what it should be like. And I think when we talk about frameworks, etc., we need to keep this in mind that this is such a broad field and there are so many different forms of doctors and clinics. Now, doctors, that is another good question. So, who are longevity physicians? And it's important to remember that there is no board certification in place at the moment. So, it's not like plastic surgery or dermatology or other specializations. Essentially, longevity physician is any doctor who is saying, I'm a longevity physician. So they are doing their own research, they're applying their own findings, and there are some specializations that are definitely very likely to be good longevity physicians because they do things like internal medicine or endocrinology or geriatrics, or of course lifestyle medicine, and there are so many others. But you couldn't tell it's just those and not others. It's maybe more a thing about personality, because this is not easy medicine. This is not like, oh, you come in, I know you have this symptom, and I give you a pill, and out you go through the door. It's very intense. It's very personalized. You have to take a lot of time, and this explains why it's unfortunately typically rather expensive because doctors need to take a lot of time and have to make a lot of tests. Of course, it's about skill sets that you have to obtain, and there are ways to do it, like our school. And it's very much about mindset too. I know I have friends, they are surgeons, they love their job. Their passion is to have a patient come in basically once, right? To do have surgery, and then out they go and everything is corrected. I mean, I oversimplify, but you know what I mean. With a longevity physician, this is a lifelong battle. It's a bit different. Now, what we try to do is to look at the competencies these doctors need to do. And we said, well, some of them, as I said, might be a little bit more gearing towards their personality, and others are things that they simply learn. And there is the diagnostic part that is extremely important, as I think. There's, of course, the interventional part. So following my understanding of the patient, what I'm going to apply then. And technology plays a big role in this, in both, and actually maybe even communicating with the patient. And you have to be able to be a good team player, because usually longevity it really relates to many different factors. Healthy aging is not just medicine; it's everything that you do, from psychology to exercise to sleep, to so many things. And then there is patient education and lifestyle coaching, which is something we must never forget, because I said it's a complex thing, and it really relates to parts of your life that the doctor is not going to be present at. So if he tells you you need to work out more, you have to eat differently. This is not something that you have to do as a patient. And the question is, are you going to follow his advice? How good is he at helping you understand that this is a necessity and coach you? So what you see here, you probably can't make out because it's printed too small, but it's just trying to show you there are so many interconnected health factors that are relevant to healthy aging. There is the environment that plays a big role. And I think it may be that in some places in Africa, that environment might be a bit hostile. It might be dry, it might be hot, it might be polluted. And lifestyle, as I just said before, is extremely important. And there are mental and psychological aspects. Very simply put, if you don't want to live a long, healthy life, you're not going to, because you might not take care of yourself. You might not have any others. You might feel alone and depressed. And then, of course, there are things that are clearly medical, like, your metabolic system, your epigenetics. I'm sure you heard about them, the way that our genes are being turned on and turned off, depending ultimately on our lifestyle. Genetics, which are also important. I mean, the question is again, do we trigger the right genes? But if we possess them or don't possess them at all, of course, this makes an effect too. And then transcriptomic and proteomics and the microbiome that is so important, and the immune system. And I could go on, but it just shows that anamnesis and advanced diagnostics is an extremely important part of longevity medicine, because you have to measure, you have to optimize, you have to go back and repeat all that. And it's continuous. You have to look at the medical history of patients, at their family history, at their biome. So what really makes them up, their genome, their genes, the DNA, the epigenetics, what of these genes are being activated, their microbiome, their physiome. So when we look at and analyze patients, we can go from the very complex to the things that a normal person can't even think to understand, to the very simple. How much do you weigh? Is that all fat? Is it muscle? Do you have strong bones or not? So there are ways to do all that, to see how fit is a patient and what sort of environment are they exposed to? What is their emotional, their cognitive health? And there are many, many things that are important here. And you can look towards the past in these diagnostics, because if you do a blood test and then the results come back, let's say 2 or 3 weeks later, and you see your doctors a month later, then you're actually talking about things that are in the past. Maybe the blood markers have changed. Normally, they don't change from a day-to-day basis, but still, you're looking back. So many of the things that we heard about, these multi-omics, genomics, epigenomics, these are things of the past. And even imaging, as interesting as it may be, shows you how your body looked like at the moment of the testing. And there are other many assessments that look towards the past. So how do you feel? Essentially means how did you feel in the past? And you see here, just as an overview, that these blood panels, as the biomarkers that we look to very often, are extremely complex, and it's not sufficient to just do one. I remember very recently, a couple of weeks ago, I was at a conference, and there was a wonderful doctor speaking from the US. He was the founding father of lifestyle medicine. And he said he's still working as a doctor, that a patient came to visit and he checked one blood marker, and then that patient came back a couple of weeks later and he said, well, that one was bad. Maybe we should check another. Like, oh, your sugar was too high. Maybe we check your fats, your lipids. And I was like, that's pretty interesting because normally you do all of them at once because it's not that expensive. And of course, you want to have a holistic picture. So I think that shows, without any disrespect to this gentleman, that we are moving fast towards an approach where we check as much as we can if these means are available to us. And there are indicators of damage that we want to check, like problems that already exist, like your arteries. Is there something that sort of makes them too dense, or other functions of your organs that are maybe not so good? Or we look towards predictors of risk and saying, well, maybe everything is fine right now, but look at your insulin resistance, at your mitochondrial health, your stress levels, your hormone levels. So maybe the damage has not been done yet, but you are at a high risk that there will be damage in the near future. So this is basically what we are trying to do. And you see many of the suggested tests in here in small print, not important to remember them unless you are doctors. And then you might know. I said we look into the past, we look at the present too. So continuous diagnostics, we use them a lot in longevity science, and everybody's excited about that. You know, the Aura rings that tell you about your sleep and other parameters, whether it's other smart watches, or even continuous glucose monitors and blood pressure monitors. So there's many things that we can track: fat, body composition, sleep, stress levels, daily activity. Just think about your daily steps. A lot of people count their steps on their smartphones. There are lots of things that we can do. We can even early detect our maybe risk of having a stroke during the night, or arrhythmias, etc. So this continuous testing becomes more and more important. And then there is predictive testing. It's still at a very early stage, but we're talking about digital twins, applying essentially AI and machine learning to test what we can do for a patient and to see, okay, what is the impact of that? Or just feeding this model his biomarkers and his risk levels, and then see what happens. So these calculators are becoming extremely important as clinical decision support systems and others, still at an early stage, but helpful tools for a doctor. And when we talk about the intervention part, that is interesting too, because this intervention really comes in different forms. And they range from lifestyle interventions, just advice on exercise and what you should eat, and maybe some supplements that you can take. But supplements is interesting too, because it depends on the country that you're living in, whether that is a supplement or just food, or a chemical or a drug. So we can use, we see the off-label use of licensed drugs, so drugs that have been used or created for some purpose and are now being repurposed for something different in the context of longevity medicine. And we see fully experimental approaches, so things that everybody's very excited about, but which are still very early stage, where we don't have clear clinical evidence that they are safe and useful for what we want to do with them in the context of longevity medicine. And these are the stem cell therapies, the gene editing, to some extent the peptides and the exosomes and so on. So it's actually really interesting. And then you have supportive technologies, basically biohacking devices, the things that we often hear about, maybe hot sauna, red light therapy, cold chamber, hyperbaric oxygen chamber, essentially putting a mild form of stress on your body to trigger regenerative inbuilt systems, which makes sense and is definitely interesting. But we also don't have proof that this is actually prolonging life. But we do have proof in the context of sports medicine and others that this is helping us to regenerate. So there is something to be said for it, for sure. Now, in terms of longevity intervention for doctors, of course, you first have to look at the things where we know they work. They might be a little bit more boring, and they require the patient to actually work together with the doctor. And this is precision nutrition, tailored exercise programs, changes maybe to the environment, reduce exposure to toxins, strategies to address cognitive or mental issues, emotional health, or maybe hormone therapy, which is basically traditional medicine, but extremely important. Now, the advanced interventional services, they come in different forms. And again, we sort of, I mean, this is not precise, but just as an overview, we try to go from what is available widespread, what is from a legal point of view, maybe less of a risk, to the things that are probably not available to your doctors and probably shouldn't be. So these can be supplements. Lots of interesting supplements out there, senolytics that helps the clearance of senescent cells, hormetic compounds. We talked about putting your body under stress, helping him regenerate. You can do that on a cellular level, actually. Metabolic modulators, NAD precursors, helping with the, let's say, diminishing access to energy a cell has when you grow older, typically. Physical therapies, plasma exchange. The many talked about peptides, which I think merit an hour on their own at least, exosomes, etc. So lots of things going on here. And now we talked about, okay, what is the requirements of a doctor? So this was the AB. Now the C, the technology integration. This is actually something that's quite difficult because doctors typically are not IT experts. And now you have so many things that are coming together. The real-time monitoring, your smartwatch, your Aura Ring or whatever. So excuse me for mentioning the brand. You can take any of these rings. The age clocks that are interesting, of course, trying to assess your biological age versus your chronological, any sort of diagnostics people run at home. So lots of dry blood tests that show you some things that might be going on in your body, other health apps, predictive AI models, social factors, whatever. And this all combined with the diagnostics we mentioned before, this is what a doctor has to act upon. And this is actually quite difficult. And then the doctor typically doesn't work alone. So we covered things like the basics, right? Lifestyle changes. Now, for anything to happen for a longevity physician, they need to have a network. So that can be outsourced, but the bigger clinics have everything included, right? So they have other medical and clinical experts they can refer the patients to. They have staff to help them deal with the patients. They work with external laboratories or maybe as a hospital, even internal one, genomic and epigenetic labs. They might work together with in-house or affiliated nutritionists and dietitians and fitness coaches and physiotherapists, of course, mental health experts, longevity researchers, because they want to keep up with what's happening, and then policy experts. And this is part of the discussion today, right? What about the policy? But I think what has been missing so far is the communicational skills. So you have to educate patients and coach them, not just about the why, but also the how. So why should they be changing their lifestyle? Why are you choosing this kind of set of interventions for them, maybe medical, not lifestyle related, and how they should be doing this. And this is a problem because, again, these numbers are from industrialized countries, but it doesn't really matter. I think that common sense tells us that a lot of people don't listen to what their doctors say. And these numbers are actually very high in some questions. So hypertension, for instance, in the US, non-compliance rate is as high as 93%. Well, of course, if you have hypertension, your doctors will tell you, well, I mean, we all know that in America, the diet is not extremely healthy in general, right? So they would say, well, reduce a bit of fat, reduce the salt, etc. So basically, do away with your burgers and steaks, and nobody complies with that. So I think in such a complex type of medicine, like longevity medicine, we don't talk enough about how to ensure that patients actually stick to what the doctors tell them, because it's wonderful to have all those diagnostic tools. But I mean, if you give them a 40, 50 pages report on what they should be doing and who they are from a, biological standpoint, that doesn't matter if they don't act upon it. So you can do things about that. You can personalize the treatments, of course, and try to find the things that actually fit within their lifestyle and preferences and enhance communication. Try to communicate in a simple way. It's nice showing off, but in the end, does it really help the patient if you throw around with words that they don't understand? And you need to set milestones that are achievable to them, because yes, we all know theoretically what should be done, but it's a step-by-step process. You cannot expect somebody who's been living in a very unhealthy fashion to change everything from today until tomorrow. And there are, of course, ways to use technology. And I know that in Africa, everybody has a phone. So this is actually the sometimes much higher than even in Western countries, because you use it for banking and other things. And I'm sure there are tons of good apps out there that help you through gamification to really improve adherence to these protocols. Now, when we talk about how to adopt all these new things, not just technologies, but medical findings in general, whether in a clinical or a research setting, there are things that need to be done. As a doctor, you always have to ask, okay, is the level of evidence high enough so I can actually use this in my country that I'm living in? Because we get students from basically everywhere. And these countries, they differ a lot. So Switzerland is very conservative. A lot of the things that we discuss, that we talk about here today and in other settings in our school are not available to doctors. When you go to Southeast Asia or to the other markets, things are more liberal. Whether that's a good thing or not a good thing remains to be discussed and has to be discussed on an individual case-by-case basis or technology-by-technology basis. But definitely before you should adopt things in your country, in your clinic, you have to ensure that there is safety and also, of course, utility, right? So it has to work for your patients before you can do that. And if you want to try out things that are new, then it has to be done under a pilot that is registered as a trial, and then look at, is there like ethics approval required? Do you have to register that in a trial registry? And then you can onboard patients and thereby create transparency, not just for your patients, but also for other healthcare providers that then can look at these findings. And when we talk so much about AI architecture, tech, etc., then it's also something about digital trust that needs to be discussed, because all those data that is being generated, all those health records, etc., they need to be kept safe. And again, there is also the need for continuous monitoring and feedback that we need to integrate into that loop. So I think this is actually all things that are required. And of course, we have to scale them with transparency. So remember, this was things that we now need for, let's say, a small pilot. What about if we increase that from one clinic across many or across many hospitals or many healthcare providers? So it's actually quite interesting. And I think that these longevity frameworks need to be rooted in an academic environment, because this structure really ensures that there is less noise and there is safety, ultimately for the patients, but also for the doctors that want to trust their education that they're getting. And right now it's pretty much scattered. So there are tons of sources, and I'm not saying that maybe some of them are not very good, but if you get your information online from some homepages, etc., you don't really know who's providing that and who's vetting that. And if you're using social media, I think some of these guys are very good, but they need to, there's a limitation to the medium itself. If you look at TikTok videos that are, I don't know, a minute long, 30 seconds, how much can you actually say in 30 seconds when you talk about complex science? So there is a limitation to the medium as such. And we have to create an atmosphere where there is credibility and trust, and typically universities are the way to go, and ensure quality, and are not driven by marketing or just personal opinion, or at least relatively. I mean,
this system, they are going to far and wide. They are going to do north and south.
We also have to ensure that, that we have to build standards, governance, and when we look at regulatory leadership in that space, it's actually very rare. There are very few countries that have regulatory guidelines when it comes to longevity. So Abu Dhabi is the only one. The Department of Health has created, I think it was about a year ago, a little bit more maybe, a framework for healthy longevity medicine centers, basically governing what should be longevity medicine in the country. But most of the countries now still lack comparable regulation. And as such, the doctors, they are working in a vacuum, not really sure whether they do things that are legal or not. And this is something that we try to address scientifically, so to speak. And I'm going to share it afterwards. We got accepted with a scientific paper that essentially gives you a framework for healthy longevity clinic. We did that from a Swiss perspective, obviously, because we involved a lot of Swiss doctors. But at the same time, I think many of these findings are useful in other geographies and jurisdictions as well. So hopefully this will help people to sort of adapt and localize them further, or simply, you know, to set up clinics of their own where they can say they follow a governance protocol that is extensive. The pillars for that are medical governance and oversight. So very simple. Every clinic should be led by a qualified medical doctor trained in longevity medicine. Now, problem here is how many good trainings or any trainings are out there. We are the only ones doing it from an academic perspective. There are some others, but it's very important that you have somebody in charge who's really deep into this, into clinically validated medical science, looking up research, ensuring there is compliancy also from an ethical point of view. Another pillar would be this interdisciplinary care. Longevity care requires teams, and we said this before, of many specialists under standardized protocols. So again, patients know what to expect. There has to be transparency, a clear communication on the risks of things that are being done and the benefits and the regulatory status. Because I dare say that a lot of patients that are excited about these opportunities when they hear somebody speaking on the internet might not know that this is something that could be very dangerous to them or could be legal. They go to their doctors and say, oh, I want to do this. I heard this. This has helped one person that I saw online. And actually, they can't check whether that person actually did it. So I think it's safe to say that we have to ensure transparency and patient protection above anything else. And of course, we have to do continuous audits, quality management, outcome tracking, monitoring these patients over long times and ensuring safety and actual results. Because without that, I think we're wasting everybody's time, or maybe even worse, we're taking the money for things that don't work, and much, much worse, we're actually impacting their health in a negative way. And this is happening. And hopefully, and this is, of course, me speaking as a teacher, it would also be nice to use these new centers that are being created around the world in order to progress scientific advancement, to run studies, to work together, to build bigger studies in multi-centers, in order to answer many of these questions that we discussed today, whether these things work, whether they should be applied or not. I think we need more clinical evaluation, but only so under academic guidelines, under strict scientific guidelines. Now, this is the framework that I just mentioned before. It's going to be published soon. It's already accepted in the journal Longevity, good name, by the way, by Taylor and Francis, a big publishing house. It's called Towards Responsible Longevity Medicine, Swiss Frameworks for Healthy Longevity Medicine Clinics. And you see some of the wonderful doctors listed here that has helped us put that together. And I think it's a very robust and very interesting read that hopefully is going to be available soon. Now, very quickly, since I want to leave some time for questions, just a few words about us. So, as I mentioned before, the Geneva College of Longevity Science, as the name says, is located in Geneva, Switzerland. We're the first academic education that focuses entirely on longevity science. We are offering academic education, so an executive master's at the moment, so really targeted at people that have a prior academic degree and want to go into the field of longevity science, not necessarily limited to doctors. So we have people from all kinds of background, research to investment to regulatory, so from lawyers to investors to startup founders, everybody who wants to be part of that space, people from the insurance industry, from finance, etc. But of course, a lot of doctors, because they are at the forefront of this. We are going to follow up with a PhD program together with another university in the near future, hopefully. So I'm have green light here, but I hope we can make an announcement early next year. We offer continuing medical education because, as you've seen from my talk today, educating doctors is extremely important. And for them, we have the what we call Certified Longevity Physician course with a lot of deep dives into specific focus points, I would say, of longevity medicine, whether that's women's longevity, brain aging, regenerative medicine, etc. And then professional education. So these are certificate courses for those healthcare providers that work together with the doctors typically. So that can be nutritionists, fitness coaches, or physiotherapists, and this is an ongoing list. So we are very glad about an international faculty of more than 80 experts from different backgrounds, a lot of them doctors, of course, but biologists, researchers, psychologists, and then experts on movement and nutrition and many other disciplines. And we are very proud to welcome a number of students, some actually also from Africa, which is wonderful because I think that you are living at that place that is going to shape the future of longevity, science, and medicine. So hopefully we can all together make an impact. And I wanted to say thank you once again for having me today. And I hope I could raise some points or make you aware of some of the things that are happening that were of interest to you. And if you have any more questions for the next few minutes, I'm very happy to answer them.
Is there any scholarship program at the College of Longevity Medicine, Geneva?
Please, who is talking? Sorry, excuse me. Who asked the question, please? Please let's at least maintain a decorum. Like he's just finishing and someone is turning on the mic to ask a question. We need to organize it because it's an organized meeting. I hope we understand. Meantime, Prof, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. We're really grateful for the opportunity amidst the complexities and regarding to communication. Thank you so much for being here and throwing more light on the importance of why we should do something with regards to longevity in Africa. So before I start with the question that we've put together to organize the conversation, I would ask the person that really asked the previous question to ask her question.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Prof. Thank you very much for the wonderful lecture. I just have one question. Is the College of Medicine Longevity Medicine Geneva, are they offering scholarship, maybe fully funded or 50% funded?
Yes, we do. Of course, we are a private school. So this makes it all a bit more complicated for us because we don't have access to state funds. At the same time, it's extremely important for us to support students from regions with lower income. So we work together with a foundation in Germany that actually allows us to offer a partial scholarship, 50% scholarship to many students from India, from Africa, from other places where our tuition fees are considered very high. And at the same time, we have limited space for full scholarships now and then. But of course, there is sort of a waiting list for that already established.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, as partners, there are also a kind of discount for people that comes through Afrolongevity. So we have a statement for that, and that's why we need to really push for this education and for people to really participate. It's one of the most comprehensive longevity institution globally, like the best in the world are there. And I've gone through, I looked at the curriculum, and I also did recommend some of their professional courses Most of the doctors here can take some of the courses. We have medical doctors here. We have clinicians and researchers. You can take some of the longevity courses there. Any more questions before I proceed with my questions? Okay, we have a question in the chat. What is the best way we can approach the longevity now, for example, through pharmaceutical products or medicine, through environmental improve and hygiene, through diet improve and exercise? Someone
Very
asked.
very relevant question. But of course, there are like two answers to it. So I would say the most scientific answer is it depends on you as a person individually, because maybe you are already living a very good life, eating clean, working out, doing sports, looking after yourselves in many ways. Then to take the next step, it's going to be a little bit more complicated, and maybe you have a medical condition that you have to look after first. But on general, of course, everybody has the means to do something about healthy aging by looking after food, clean living, access maybe to some sort of clean water. So these are the basics. I mean, this is what public health teaches us. Normally, we take a part of that for granted and say, well, the basics are available to people. So it's more a question of what they want to do with it. And we know for a fact there are tons of studies that eating the right kind of diet, not a specific one, not saying it has to be the Mediterranean diet or what the people in Okinawa eat. No, just eating, let's say, varied sources of protein and vitamins, etc. This is the way forward, and doing sports, etc. So yes, lifestyle is the most important factor for healthy aging. Long before you should think about medical intervention, you need to get these things right.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. Let's get deep into this. In Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa, we still have open drug markets. By that, I mean where people just go in to buy their pharmaceuticals and it is not regulated. So, which is causing a problem. And currently in Nigeria, we have over 60% of fake and substandard drugs or medications in the country. And the regulatory authorities are trying to do what they can, but they don't have a system in place to do that. So what ethical and regulatory tool can countries deploy to dismantle the open drug markets that flood the continent with fake and substandard medication without destabilizing access for low-income population who depends on this informal system? Yeah, because it's somehow, yeah.
Yes. Well, obviously, this is a very specific problem in that I'm not super familiar with. I have to say that it would be very easy to suggest, well, just get it regulated. I think that is unrealistic at the moment. What is important is education in all of its forms, not just the academic information in this case, but making information about healthcare, not necessarily longevity, but also longevity available to people on the streets in simple words, to make them understand about what is healthcare that they should be looking for, maybe causing them to look after what is the root problem of my disease, not just taking pain medication, but trying to get rid of the problem that is lies underneath. So I would say education always is the most important, but depending on your environment, maybe you have to start with the basic education in schools, etc. And this is something that we are very excited about when we see the opportunity to introduce maybe some of the things that we do into biology classes in schools. And you can do so in a fashion that is not overwhelming. So still, again, like when we talked about the doctor before, and people sticking to the advice that they are giving by saying this in a fashion that people can actually follow and understand, I think increases chances of that. So We need to educate consumers and patients, and then I think things will improve.
Okay, my second question is, we've seen when it comes to clinical trials, the complexities that plays out, and people believe that Africa is always where they can dump anything and do whatever they want to do. My question is, sorry, let's see. That's part of the problem we're talking about. So my question is, how can Africa shift from being a site for external, how can Africa shift from being a site for external driven clinical trials to becoming a principal investigator region where trials reflect African genetics, disease pattern, and environmental exposure? First, you know that we are genetically diverse. We are the most genetically diverse country globally.
Yes. So I think it's extremely important, and this is something that we have learned in the past, and maybe tragically it started, I think, in the context of AIDS medication very early on, that things that have been developed based on white populations didn't work so well in Africa in the beginning. So we need to include that, and of course there are now a lot of efforts going into multi-center studies taking into account Asian or African or Middle Eastern populations, not just Western populations. I think in order to be able to do so, we need frameworks. I'm not saying our framework needs to be the one adopted, because maybe we're talking more about traditional medicine rather than longevity medicine when we talk about these drugs. Longevity medicine actually has its own issues with doing studies, because tracking people over a long time and seeing whether they live longer or not is actually quite difficult. It's maybe easier to follow them during a state of disease and say, oh, maybe 3 months after, 6 months after, are they healthy again? But anyway, we need these frameworks. So I'm sure there are many good or excellent hospitals in Africa as places of excellence that are adopting international standards, because you need to have comparable standards to run these studies at different centers under the same guidelines. So it's really, again, maybe something that has to do a little bit with education, because you send out African doctors to study in other places of the world, and they come back and they bring back these frameworks that need to be put into place, because it's not just a question of better or worse. I think it's a question of comparability, and therefore having same or very similar standards. And this is surely going to happen. And I think one of the things that could actually help with that is the immense potential that we now see in countries like Nigeria, that are extremely fascinating financial markets. And I think with such a growing population, it's interesting for healthcare providers, for pharma companies, etc., to come into the country and do these things, because they're essentially, again, trying to sell something.
Yeah, that's a very good structure and strategy to follow. But of course, you know, in Africa, we have one of the finest clinicians globally. The problem is not the doctors. The problem is the system, because even the smartest doctor might even look like a zombie in a society where there is no process and systems. So I'm going to ask a threefold question, which is my last question, before I allow Chisom to ask his question. My question is, can you mute yourself? My question would be based on bioequivalence and drug quality, pharmacovigilance infrastructure, and the ethical inclusion, where we're going to find a way to ensure that rural and marginalized population are ethically included in regenerative medicine trial without coercion and exploitation. So my first question then is, how can Africa regulators strengthen bioequivalence testing framework to ensure that generic medicines especially in countries with weak manufacturing oversight, match the clinical performance of originators' drugs. And then the second one would be giving Africans a fragmented pharmacovigilance. Because since I'll take Nigeria, for example, since late Professor Dorak passed, the pharmacovigilance in Nigeria is relatively low. And no one cares. Like, no one cares to collect data with regards to pharmacovigilance, how drugs interact with the general population is no one's business. So given Africa's fragmented pharmacovigilance system, what scalable model can integrate hospitals, pharmacies, and community health workers into a unified real-time adverse event reporting network?
A very tough question for me as a teacher, because that goes, of course, into the regulatory oversight and not just the theoretical knowledge that we are teaching. I would say a very good idea is to look at young countries that have fastly adopting healthcare systems. So I think one of the reasons why everybody is looking towards GCC, so UAE, United Arab Emirates, or maybe Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, etc. It's not just because these are rich countries where you say, oh, they have lots of money. Well, they do, but they also have a lot of healthcare problems due to unhealthy lifestyle and maybe even some genetic predisposition for some early onsetting of age-associated disease. So they have problems. And I think what they also have is they have a willingness to change things, and they have young healthcare systems because they are young societies, not just from an age point of view, but these are young states. They were created maybe also like 50, 60 years ago. So it's in that sense, a very similar situation to Africa, I think, many of the countries. And they have pretty good solutions because, well, yes, they do have money, but it's not just the money. They also have like a regulatory vision of which sometimes I think follows the wish of the rulers. So it's sometimes easier to implement these things if you have a select few people that are deciding. But I think that is one reason why we can look at them as sort of test environments, sandboxes, if you will, where we see is that something that can work or not. And we mentioned before Abu Dhabi as one state of the United Arab Emirates, where the Department of Health has initiated these longevity guidelines, but other guidelines as well that are very interesting. And I think we should look towards them and see if these are things that can be exported to other countries.
Okay, thank you so much for taking your time in addressing these questions.
Good day, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, this is Jason from Port Harcourt, Nigeria. Mine is not necessarily a question, but from the question that Mr. Kalu asked, I looked back to what I wrote down in my notes. Professor Demetriades said that longevity is about the things you do when the doctor is not there with you. And hearing him talking about how to manage the situation of the open markets and policymakers, I just reminisced back to what happened to me. I'm a biologist, so sometimes I try to share some of the things I learned in class with my social media handles, but people barely engaged with what I said because I was just speaking. Not until I started growing my own vegetables and I made videos and people started seeing that I am doing it. And then they started chatting me up, trying to ask me, how are you doing it? They want to do it. They want to visit my garden and all of that. And it became easier to even influence them to start growing their own food. So that should be the case in Nigeria. We shouldn't focus now on the policymakers because here I can tell you it's so bad that it's difficult to change these kind of things because there are a lot of people that benefit from what they are doing. So it will be very difficult or it will take a longer time to do. But if we can focus on ourselves, maybe begin with ourselves and do those things and let people see us do them, And then it will be easier to change them at a personal level, and then to the family levels, and then maybe to the community levels, and people begin to see the difference in quality. And it will be easier to begin from there before we can get to the policymakers, because it will be difficult. I know I'm talking about a lot of things that are going wrongly in this part of the world where we find ourselves. I mean, many things that we can see, yet they are not fixed. Now, come to talk about medical issues. These are things we cannot see. You talk about lung disease. People are not seeing these things, but when you go to the medical record, they are there. So it's even more difficult to make these policies. But people like us will become the policymakers tomorrow. It will be easier for us to change, because somehow I believe you can't change what you don't have control over. But you can do what we can. There are things that we can do. So we should begin with those things that we can do and begin to do them little by little. Maybe we can start influencing people around us. So that's just what I wanted to share. Thank you so much, Prof. I've learned a lot, and I've jotted down some things that you said. And again, let me just ask this question. In fact, how can somebody study in the Geneva Longevity of College of Longevity Science? If that would be possible, I would gladly appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your input, and you're right. I think lots of these changes have to be done bottom up and not just top down. So it's not always us looking for the regulator for changing things, but creating like change from many people, and this will be reflected ultimately. So I think wonderful. Yes, I just wanted to say from my side, thank you very much for inviting me here and this interesting discussion. Thank you for your trust. I have to admit that many of these questions are very interesting, and when they go into transformalizing the whole healthcare system in Africa, then probably I'm not the biggest expert to ask, but it's definitely fun to see what could be something that can be done. Again, see myself more as a teacher, but I think education really is the basis for everything in healthcare. And we also have to educate the population. And this is something that Afrolongevity is doing very well. So I'm very grateful for this partnership. And yeah, thanks again, once again from Switzerland, and hope to see you at one of our events, maybe in the future, one of yours.
Okay. Thank you so much, Professor Thor. Chisom, I'm going to send you the link. I had this conversation with you earlier with regards to how you can school with the Geneva College of Longevity Science. And you can take some crash courses to accelerate what you're doing. So thank you so much, Professor Thor, for an exceptional and deeply insightful session. Your clarity, expertise, and commitment to ethical medical innovation have given the Afro-longevity movement a stronger foundation to rethink Africa's future in regenerative medicine, clinical trials, and pharmacovigilance, right? So we are grateful for your time, your wisdom, your humility, you know, the way you talk, the way you like carry everyone along, and your willingness to help in shaping a healthier and more accountable, more scientifically empowered continent like ours. So, guys, this is our time. Whatever we are learning from this platform is for us to do better in Africa and for us to develop a system, a functional principles and standard for our continent. We might not adopt everything from the West because they are affected differently, and we are even more closer to our biodiversity. Thank you so much. Good evening. From here, good afternoon, good morning, and good night, depending on where you're joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.